Did Trump declare war on Putin? That's exactly the question that arises when you once again try to analyze the nuclear threats that keep surfacing in the information space. For a long time, discussions about nuclear weapons remained mostly theoretical. It existed as a frightening symbol, one more likely to be found in books and movies about the end of the world than in real politics. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world, as many believe, came as close as ever to nuclear war, states chose to take a step back. The politicians of that time chose the path of diplomacy, reducing arsenals, creating the impression of confident control over the situation. Peaceful speeches, statements about cooperation, and assurances that the era of global confrontation was gradually fading into the past began to appear on the public agenda. But starting in 2022, this familiar picture changed dramatically. The Kremlin, having failed to achieve the swift victory it so desired in Ukraine and dragging out its so-called special operation for years, began to use nuclear rhetoric much more frequently and aggressively. Nuclear weapons once again became a tool of pressure on the international stage. And not as a hypothetical scenario, but as an open threat. Russian statements boiled down to the idea that it is precisely their nuclear potential that should deter the West from taking decisive action. This tactic has partially worked in expert circles, and among Western politicians, there really is an opinion that some decisions regarding military aid to Ukraine are made with consideration for that very risk of nuclear escalation. As a result, Russia found itself as the only country that systematically and irresponsibly used threats of nuclear weapons as an element of political pressure. But the situation changed dramatically when US President Donald Trump entered the information field. Moreover, he threw down the very same nuclear challenge to the Russian Federation. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva, while you're liking and subscribing to our channel. By the way, you can write in the comments how seriously you take this standoff, and I'll tell you step by step everything we've learned so far about this very nuclear confrontation. So let's get started. Donald Trump publicly stated that the United States nuclear arsenal is bigger and better than Russia's. According to the New York Times, Trump directly refuted claims of Russian superiority in a conversation with journalists. He emphasized that the US possesses a greater number of nuclear warheads, but at the same time stated that only one is needed, implying that the significance of numbers in a real conflict can be very relative. Trump also noted that American military equipment surpasses Russian equipment and that this has been repeatedly proven in practice. As an example, he mentioned Russian air defense systems, which, according to him, demonstrated insufficient effectiveness during the American operation in Venezuela. Taken separately, this phrase could be seen as a mockery of Putin, but the image of Donald Trump reminds us that every one of his speeches is a mockery of the entire world of politics. And we have witnessed this more than once. Let us recall that in October 2025, Trump made another sensational move. For the first time in 33 years, he announced his intention to resume nuclear testing. He emphasized that the United States should test its arsenal on an equal footing with other nuclear powers, including Russia and China. According to him, the United States possesses the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and it must be operational, not just exist on paper. At the same time as Donald Trump's sharp statements about American superiority in the nuclear sphere, experts are increasingly warning that the world could find itself on the brink of a new arms race. Stephen Pfeiffer, a leading American arms control expert and former director of the U.S. National Security Council, commented to Forbes that after the expiration of the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the situation could rapidly change the balance of power. According to him, the termination of the agreement without signing a new one paves the way for both countries to build up their nuclear arsenals. Such a development could return the world to a state of tension reminiscent of the era of the first thermonuclear arms race. And the term of the treaty signed in 2010 expires on February 5th, 2026. And it is this date that has become a key point in analysts' forecasts. The treaty limited the number of deployed warheads to 1,550 for each side, that is, for Russia and the United States of America. This was the only international document that not only recorded the number of armaments, but also allowed for checks and inspections. It was precisely this mechanism that ensured transparency. Earlier, I misspoke. It did allow for checks and inspections. It was precisely this mechanism that ensured transparency. That is, every year the parties could conduct dozens of these very inspections, during which experts checked the actual number of warheads and the condition of their delivery systems. Piefer, in turn, emphasizes that Vladimir Putin proposed to extend the treaty for another year, but with serious reservations that would have effectively stripped the agreement of any practical meaning. According to the expert, the Kremlin wanted to keep the limits on the number of warheads, but to exclude the possibility of inspections. Such a position would have made the treaty a mere formality, without any real oversight. And this would mean that Russia could actually secretly increase the number of warheads and intercontinental ballistic missiles deployed in silos and on submarines, which would be hidden and covertly moved through the world's oceans. An expert from the Nuclear Treaty Initiative notes that Russia's unilateral blocking of inspections has already created a serious gap in the verification mechanism. The American side is effectively deprived of the ability to ensure that Moscow is adhering to the restrictions established by this agreement. This not only reduces the level of trust, it also deprives the United States of motivation to continue an agreement that, in fact, cannot be monitored. The publication draws attention to the fact that such a significant gap in the control system creates room for maneuvering, which potentially renders negotiations on extension meaningless. At the same time, Piefer notes that there is also a view within the Pentagon that the current restrictions may be too strict. Against the backdrop of the growing nuclear capabilities of other countries, primarily China, some members of the U.S. military believe that the United States should have the ability to increase its arsenal. But this automatically means that Russia will respond in kind, triggering a new round of the arms race. Piefer suggests that even if such an arms race does begin, it will not go too far. Historical experience from the 1960s shows that increasing the number of warheads does not enhance security and, on the contrary, leads to the opposite effect. Despite this, tensions on the international agenda are rising, and Donald Trump's statements only fuel this process. Even despite the sharpness of his words, he still expresses hope for reaching a new agreement with Russia. In an interview with the New York Times, he stated that if the current treaty ceases to be in effect, the U.S. will seek to conclude a better agreement. However, Trump simultaneously emphasized the need to involve China in these negotiations, as its arsenals are growing faster than anyone else's in the world, and according to him, any future agreements must take new realities into account and include more participants. Trump emphasizes that the expiration of the treaty does not mean the immediate start of a nuclear war. He stated directly that if the agreement ends, the US and Russia will be able to expand their arsenals without restrictions for the first time in half a century. But this will not automatically lead to disaster, says Donald Trump. At the same time, the American president insists that if the current treaty is terminated, it will be possible to conclude a new one, more advantageous for the United States. In his view, this process is part of a larger political deal, not a direct path to conflict. However, the disappearance of existing restrictions still increases anxiety on the international stage. The threat does not lie in the fact that the countries will immediately start exchanging nuclear strikes, but in the fact that both sides will have the opportunity to increase their arsenals, make them less transparent and more unpredictable. Back in November, he stated that the United States needs to test its own nuclear weapons to verify and maintain them in working condition. He referred to the fact that Russia had announced it would conduct tests, and North Korea does this constantly. Trump emphasized that the US is essentially the only country that does not conduct tests and that such exclusivity does not look like an advantage, but rather as a strategic vulnerability. According to him, it is impossible to be confident in the reliability of the nuclear arsenal if it has not undergone full-scale testing for decades. Trump paid special attention to the quantitative characteristics of the American nuclear arsenal. He emphasized that the US has enough warheads to blow up the entire world 150 times over. This phrase became one of the most quoted, as it highlights the level of tension to which the global discussion has returned. In addition, Trump mentioned that he had discussed the issue of denuclearization with Vladimir Putin, as well as with the leader of China, Xi Jinping, noting that China also possesses a significant amount of nuclear weapons and, on top of that, is increasing the pace of its buildup. Thus, the international situation has reached a new point of uncertainty. On the one hand, Russia uses threats of deploying nuclear weapons as one of its tools of pressure, periodically blocking inspections and creating that very atmosphere of unpredictability. On the other hand, Trump, responding to this rhetoric, emphasizes American superiority and demonstrates a readiness for tougher measures, including the possible resumption of nuclear testing. All of this leads to the global discussion about nuclear weapons returning to a level the world has not seen since the Cold War. That's all we have time to tell you for now. Thank you for being with us. Be sure to subscribe, like, leave your comments, and we'll see you in the next broadcast. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye-bye, everyone.